My name's Adrian. I'm 29 now, but everything I'm about to tell you started when I was 23. Back then, I was the sort of person people politely described as still figuring things out. I wasn't exactly broke. I was a junior architect at a small firm, but I didn't have flashy cars or tropical vacation photos like my older brother, Lucas. He was Mom's golden child. Everything he did was celebrated, while what I did was a nice start, but maybe aim higher. She had a way of offering it as advice that always stung. I grew up knowing she saw Lucas as destined for great things, and me as someone who would watch from the sidelines. When I met Claire, I thought my luck had finally changed. She was warm, funny, grounded. She didn't care that my life wasn't glamorous. She appreciated that I cared about my work and wasn't interested in showing off. After a year, we were engaged, planning a small, tasteful wedding that suited us. Mom was civil, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled. She dropped comments like, "Are you sure you can provide for her?" Or, "It's a big responsibility, Adrian. Women have needs." I shrugged them off at first. She'd always been like that. The first crack came at a family dinner. We were around my parents' long mahogany table, Lucas opposite me, Mom at the head like a queen. Between bites, she turned to Claire and said, "Claire, you'd look stunning in a place like Lucas's penthouse." "You've been there, haven't you?" Claire politely said no. Mom didn't skip a beat. "You should. The view is incredible. I keep telling Lucas he should settle down. Someone like you could inspire him." I laughed it off, thinking it was just Mom being tone deaf. But Claire's hand under the table was tense, her fingers rigid inside mine. That night, she asked if my mother disliked her. I said it wasn't personal. Mom had always compared me to Lucas. What I didn't see then was that this was more than awkward dinner talk. Mom was planting seeds. Over the next months, small things shifted. Claire would run into Lucas in the same parts of town. She'd get texts from Mom about helping plan a surprise for me. Sweet on the surface, until those surprises never happened. When I asked, Claire was vague and insisted it was nothing. I wanted to believe her. Then one night changed everything. I had worked late and stopped by my parents to drop off some old family photos Mom had requested. Lucas's car was parked outside. Laughter seeped from the living room. I instinctively peered through the side window and froze. Mom, Lucas, and Claire sat together, wine in hand, deep in conversation. Mom leaned forward, low but clear enough for me to catch. "Claire, you're smart. Lucas can give you the life Adrian never could. He's established, security, status, everything a woman deserves." Lucas smirked, treating it like normal. Claire looked thoughtful, not offended. My heart pounded. I didn't stay. I left without knocking, drove home, and replayed her words over and over. Every instinct told me to confront them. Another part of me, quieter, colder, told me to wait and see how deep it went. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire pulled away, too tired for dates, too busy for wedding planning. Then, at my kitchen table, she sat me down like it was a meeting. "Adrian, I think we rushed into this." She couldn't meet my eyes. My chest tightened as she spoke of needing stability and not being aligned for the future. I knew whose words she echoed. They had Mom's fingerprints all over them. The final blow was when she said, "Lucas understands what I need." I didn't clarify whether she meant emotionally or financially. I didn't have to. She packed within a week. No dramatic argument, no pleading. She left. As she walked out, suitcase in hand, she shot me a look, half guilty, half triumphant. And I knew Mom had won. I cut contact. No calls, no texts, no holidays. I quit my job, moved cities, and rebuilt my life with a single-minded focus I'd never had. I didn't tell them where I went. To them, I had vanished. In a way, I had. Disappearing gave me the power to choose when to return. Years later, I came back, not as the younger son, still figuring things out, but as the man running the show. It was a glittering Friday at a lavish charity gala. I was hosting. When I saw Mom, Lucas, and Claire walk in arm, their rehearsed smiles melted the second they saw me. And then they saw my wife. The moment our eyes met across the room, everything froze for them. Mom's smile faltered. Lucas tightened his grip on Claire. Claire looked like she had stumbled into a nightmare she thought was dead. My wife, in an emerald green gown that caught the light, tilted her head and whispered something that made me laugh softly. I didn't need to read their faces. Their confusion and discomfort were plain. But before that night, there were long years where their shadows still reached me even from afar. Initially, I told myself I'd moved on. I worked brutal hours and started my own design firm with a small team and risky contracts that could have ruined me. They didn't. Within 3 years, we were winning bids against firms that had once dismissed me. I didn't post about it. I knew my family. If they didn't hear my name, they'd assume I was still the second son. That suited me. Then reminders started appearing. An email from an old family friend slipped into my inbox, casually praising how Lucas and Claire were doing. They'd bought a big suburban home. Lucas's business was booming, though from what I heard, his investors did most of the work. Mom kept telling people Lucas had saved Claire from uncertainty. They were rewriting the story, erasing me. The real gut punch arrived at an industry event 2 years after I left. I was there for partners. Halfway through, I heard a familiar laugh and turned to see Lucas in a tailored navy suit, holding court. Claire was on his arm wearing a diamond bracelet that proclaimed, "Look what I can afford." I hesitated, but realized they hadn't seen me. Then I overheard Lucas. "Yeah, Mom always knew I'd make something of myself." "My brother," someone said. The circle chuckled. Claire sipped her wine with a faint smirk. It was a public dismissal of my life, so clean I had to step outside before I said something I'd regret. After that, my simmering anger sharpened. They kept popping up. Lucas sent a LinkedIn connection out of the blue, not to reconcile, but to invite me to a presentation for one of his ventures. I ignored it. Mom sent holiday guilt emails about family always forgives, as if I were the guilty one. They wanted to keep me in my place, to show their success, and expect me to silently accept their version of events, that I had been left behind. What they didn't know was how my life had quietly grown beyond theirs. I'd moved into a penthouse, invested in real estate, built side businesses, and by my late 20s, I wasn't just doing well. I could walk into a room and control the conversation. The more I built, the more one thought circled. If we crossed paths again, I wouldn't merely be ready. I'd hold all the cards. That day came sooner than I expected. An acquaintance in philanthropy suggested I host a charity gala for a cause I cared about. It wasn't just a business decision. It was personal, a chance to stand on a stage as someone who'd made his own name, not as someone's lesser son. Invitations went out to my network, some intentionally reaching the old social circles my family moved in. So when Mom, Lucas, and Claire arrived that night under crystal chandeliers, they still assumed they were the stars, until they saw my name on the gold-trimmed program. Lucas's face flickered between surprise and discomfort. Mom offered a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Claire's gaze darted between me and my wife. Something in her face tightened, like she'd been exposed. I could feel the tension building, a bow drawn taut. I didn't approach. I wanted them to sit in it, feel the ground shift. Then, about 40 minutes in, after the first speeches, I noticed Lucas and Claire slip away, Mom following. My gut tightened. I trailed them quietly down a side corridor toward the private lounge. Through the half-open door, I caught phrases. "You need to use this," Mom said. "He's in over his head here. All this flash is for show. Find out who's backing him. If we can get in, we'll make sure he doesn't shut us out." Lucas leaned smugly. "I doubt he's got the capital on his own. We find out who, maybe offer a better deal." Claire's voice came, calm and measured. I could just talk to him. He used to trust me. He'd tell me things if I approached it the right way. "He's still a man, Lucas. You know how to use that." I didn't move. Each word felt like a slow drip of poison. They weren't crashing my event. They were plotting to undermine me, to pry into my business, and take what they assumed I hadn't earned. "Claire, My ex casually offered to manipulate me. I could have stormed in then, torn into them publicly. But strategy held me back. They hadn't changed. They still thought I was the same younger brother they could push. They were so convinced of their superiority they didn't consider I might be listening. My wife appeared at the corridor's end, caught my eye, raised an eyebrow. I barely shook my head. She didn't press. She faded back into the crowd. Then Mom said the unfiltered truth. He was always the weak one. He's lucky we even came tonight. This could be our way to finally fold him into something worthwhile. And if he doesn't play along, her voice trailed. Lucas smirked. Claire looked toward the ballroom like she already saw the path opening. That was the final straw. The last shred of any family loyalty I'd held snapped. Whatever hope for reconciliation I had was gone. They were there for what they thought they could take from me. I stepped away from the door with a plan forming. If they wanted a game, I'd give them one, but not the one they imagined. For the first time since Claire left, I felt that cold resolve again. Only now, I wouldn't disappear. This time, they would. I didn't confront them that night. That was hard. I returned to the ballroom composed while my stomach turned. My wife glanced at me. The narrowing of her eyes said she had a guess. The rest of the evening blurred into polite conversation and forced smiles. Every time I looked over, I found them watching. Mom with that assessing gaze, Lucas with a calculating smirk, Claire with an expression I couldn't decipher. Curiosity, anticipation, or the same quiet arrogance she had when she left me. When the gala ended and guests trickled out, I stayed with my team to tidy up. The hall was dim and silent. Mom's words replayed in my head. Week 1, get in on it. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling while my wife slept beside me. A familiar ache came back, that same loneliness from the months after Claire left. But this time it was sharper. It wasn't just that they'd hurt me again, it was that they'd reminded me how much I'd let their absence shape me. In the weeks after, I went through the motions but wasn't myself. I made small mistakes at work. Not enough for others to notice, but enough for me to feel off. I replayed past slights, every shadow I'd stood in, every time I'd swallowed my pride. It felt like reopening a wound that never healed. I declined social events where they might appear, and dodged invitations from mutual acquaintances. My wife asked if I was burned out. I said I was tired from work. The truth was the old urge to vanish stirred again. But I didn't vanish. I realized I had two choices: let them shove me back into the shadows, or channel that anger into something useful. So I started paying attention. When people mentioned Lucas's business, I asked casual questions and learned it wasn't as solid as he claimed. Rumors of missed deadlines, investors pulling out. Claire kept up appearances, but a few suggested she wasn't happy as the perfect wife. I didn't act yet, but pieces were shifting in my head. I imagined not just defending myself, but striking back publicly in a way they couldn't rewrite. They kept trying their old plays. Mutual friends passed along messages from Mom asking to meet for coffee. Lucas texted to talk about opportunities. Claire didn't reach out herself, but I heard she'd been asking about my wife. They thought they were circling me. I was already setting the trap. The first move wasn't confrontation, it was elevation. If they could still reach me, I'd rise so high they'd have to crane their necks to see me. The months after the gala were a blur of calculated momentum. I threw myself into the firm with nearly obsessive focus. Every pitch was sharper, every proposal airtight. I expanded into markets I'd avoided. High-end commercial spaces and luxury residential projects for clients with deep pockets and long memories. These weren't just jobs, they were statements. And the statements were heard. Within 8 months, my company was not only profitable, it was thriving. We landed a project that put my name in the magazines. The kind of coverage people remember. My face was on a cover, standing beside a model of a high-profile development. It wasn't vanity. It was visibility. The more my name showed up, the more doors opened. Invitations arrived that once would have been closed. I didn't limit myself to architecture. I spread into real estate investments, partnerships, hospitality, and even took a small position in a tech startup run by an old colleague. Every move was intentional. Each step made the week one story they told about me harder to believe. As my career climbed, my personal life followed. My wife and I traveled Paris, Santorini, Kyoto. Little confirmations of the life I'd built on my own terms. She was more than a partner. She was my sounding board and my confidant. She never pushed me to retaliate against my family, but she understood without me having to explain. I began hosting smaller, curated evenings, intimate gatherings of influential guests, politicians, business leaders, creatives, and philanthropists. People who valued discretion and remembered who made them feel seen. Word spread, and I became more than a businessman. I became a connector, someone worth knowing. Around that time, I started hearing less flattering things about Lucas. 2 of his major contracts fell through. An investor backed out after a disagreement over spending. Rumors said he'd over-leveraged buying his suburban mansion. Claire came up in hushed conversations, described as restless and isolated. I didn't gloat or reach out. I let the distance stay. Every inch made my eventual move sharper. The real turning point was an invitation to co-chair a massive annual fundraising event, bigger than the gala I had hosted. 1. This event was a power nexus where deals were made and introductions could change a life. The invitation was both an honor and a signal. I had arrived. I made sure the guest list included enough people from the old circles so the news would reach my mother, Lucas, and Claire, not as invitations at first, but as a headline they couldn't ignore. By then, my network was wide. Information came to me easily. Mutual contacts volunteered updates as if it were a favor. Each piece of bad news about them became another brick in the wall I was building, between the person they assumed I was and the man I had become. Still, I kept my moves quiet. I wanted them curious, wondering how I went from struggling younger son to someone untouchable without an introduction. Most importantly, I wanted them to come to me. When they did, I'd be ready. The opening arrived sooner than expected. A mutual acquaintance let slip that Lucas was desperate to land a contract on a development I was partly funding. He didn't know I was involved yet, but he would. I decided it was time to bring them into the light. The tip about Lucas's desperation was the crack I'd been waiting for. The project was a luxury, mixed-use development in a booming part of the city. I wasn't the public face on the deal by design. My stake was held behind a holding company, buffered by investment partners. On paper, I was one contributor among many. In practice, I had more influence than anyone outside the inner circle guest. I called Porter, a board member who liked expensive cigars and even more expensive secrets, and mentioned casually over lunch, "There's interest from a Lucas Hale." Porter reacted, surprised, skeptical about Lucas's proposal and reputation. Reputation in my circles was currency. Lucas was running low. Over the next weeks, I gathered more threads. A financial advisor I knew told me Lucas had taken high-interest bridge loans to cover cash flow problems. That explained his urgency. He needed the payout, not just the prestige. Then I heard about Claire, not digging, but details surfaced. Someone mentioned seeing her at an upscale cafe with a man who wasn't Lucas, laughing and holding hands. I felt a familiar flicker of satisfaction, not because I cared about Claire, but because it signaled widening cracks in their image. I now had leverage. I didn't rush to expose them. This was about timing and precision, engineering a moment where the truth would leave no escape. I called the event coordinator for the annual gala I was co-chairing and supplied a curated guest list. Near the bottom, I added 3 names that would look out of place to anyone unaware of our history: my mother, Lucas, and Claire. It wasn't a peace offering. It was bait. The invitations went out on thick cream cardstock, embossed and sealed. Pride would pull them in. They wouldn't miss an event where I was greeting guests at the door and giving the keynote. The night arrived crisp and clear. The venue, a restored Art Deco theater, glowed. I stood at the entrance with my wife, greeting attendees. Each handshake and smile was deliberate. This was my arena. When a black sedan pulled up and my mother stepped out in navy, she scanned the crowd for recognition. I didn't react. Lucas followed in a suit that looked almost too eager. Claire came last, arm hooked to his, smiling thinly. "What a surprise to see you here," Mom said. "Not a surprise, Mom," I replied. "I co-chair this year." The flicker in her eyes was small, but real. Lucas looked around at names he'd once courted. Claire's eyes kept darting to my wife, who stood beside me calm and confident. Inside the theater, tables were dressed in rich linens, centerpieces of fresh flowers and candlelight. I made sure their table was visible and within earshot of key investors connected to the development Lucas wanted. During the cocktail hour, I moved through groups, dropping hints about projects and partnerships to pique curiosity. When I approached their table, I kept it composed. "Lucas," I said, "I hear you've been busy in real estate." He answered proudly that he was working on big deals and mentioned he'd been looking at that downtown development. I nodded. "Ah, the one my company's funding," I said. The silence that followed was sharp. Nearby investors listened. Lucas tried to mask his calculation. Mom suggested maybe they could work together. I stayed even. "We're being very selective," I said. "Only partners with the right stability and reputation." It wasn't personal. It was business. Claire shifted, jaw tight, throwing a glance at an investor that didn't go unnoticed. The real move came during the auction. I donated an exclusive architectural consultation. When bidding climbed, Lucas raised his paddle, surprising the room. I smiled and addressed the audience, generous. But the consultation was contingent on working with clients whose projects matched our brand standards. In this crowd, that read like a verdict. He could bid, but without my approval, there was no deal. Lucas lowered his paddle, face tight. My mother pressed her lips thin. Claire found her wine glass suddenly fascinating. I had drawn a line publicly, without raising my voice. They couldn't call it pettiness. It was just business. My last card came during the final toast when I invited my wife on stage to thank donors. The lights caught the diamond on her hand. Claire's eyes widened, recognition dawning. My wife wasn't only elegant. She was someone Claire had met years before and underestimated. Claire leaned toward Lucas and whispered. Her face went pale in the spotlight. That was the moment I knew the game had shifted. After the toast, we mingled, applause still rolling. From across the room, I watched my mother, Lucas, and Claire in a tight, silent triangle. The earlier energy had drained. People now passed their table without pause. In a room like this, reputation is currency, and they had lost some of theirs in front of the very people they'd hoped to impress. 2 days later, Porter called. "Just a heads up." Lucas reached out. "We're going another direction." Within a month, 2 more backers had pulled out for strategic reasons. His company's public presence faded. By winter, the mansion was quietly listed. Claire moved to another city and resurfaced only occasionally at charity write-ups, without the same sheen. My mother called once. The voicemail was brittle. "I think we should talk. Family is important." I didn't call back. Family is important, not when it treats you like a pawn. The following year, I hosted the gala again. Bigger, brighter, more exclusive. As I scanned the room during my opening speech, I thought of that first night when they believed they held power over me. They hadn't returned. I raised my glass. "To progress," I said, smiling at the faces before me, "and to remembering that those who doubt you often end up proving you right." The crowd laughed and clinked glasses, while in my mind I toasted 3 empty seats no one noticed were missing. That was the last time I saw them as anything but a closed chapter.